A pleasure to me all at last. Welcome back once again to films I should have talked about years ago. So for this instance, what we're going to do is talk a bit about the third film in the Evil Dead series. We have ourselves Evil Dead 3. Although for the most part, the official title is just Army of Darkness. There's no Evil Dead mentioning of it, no sequel in numerical or subtitle form of anything like that. It's just Army of Darkness. This little correlation to the rest of the Evil Dead films that had come around at the time made many people wonder if it was truly another Evil Dead film. For the ones that actually saw this, whether in theaters or otherwise, I myself, of course, do know this is an Evil Dead 3. That's of course why I just simply call it Evil Dead 3. Or of course, the title of this video will be marked as such, with Army of Darkness leading as the subtitle of the film. Because it's pretty much what this film is. Plot and story-wise, it's essentially taking place in medieval times, pretty much at the point where we left off with Evil Dead 2. When Ash Williams was transported through the wormhole from 1981, goes back to 1300 AD, he essentially drops down to the earth along with the Oldsmobile and pulls out his boomstick to shoot down a harpy that the knights were afraid of. They cheer him on for it, and yeah, Evil Dead 3 doesn't do that. What actually happens in Evil Dead 3 for the starting point is that while it does give us a bit of a flashback for the events that had happened before then, we do get ourselves a bit of a retconned starting point for the story that takes place in the rest of the Evil Dead 3. Of course, we get to see Ash Williams drop from the sky along with the Oldsmobile, but this time there's not much of anything here other than the knights examining him and the car, and they believe for him to actually be a member of a rivaling army. You see, there of course are two different factions in medieval times in 1300 AD, and Ash Williams happens to get caught in the crossfire between the armies of two different people, the army of Henry and the army of David. So what we see here is two different factions. One is labeling Ash as a foreigner / possible member of the opposing team, and as such he is taken into custody. He is of course pranced on by children and hit in the head by women, and especially this comes to terms with someone who eventually looks up to Ash Williams in a somewhat gleeful and envious manner. She learns that someone she knew had died in battle and blames Ash for it. Even worse is that there was actually an execution pit that these guys have, and even though Henry is taking it alongside them, Ash tries his best to explain to them he doesn't even know them. He definitely doesn't know anyone of Henry's army, let alone Henry himself. But still, they proceed with the execution. One guy goes into the pit, and a massive geyser of blood shoots out. Spoiler alert though, compared to the other two films, Evil Dead 3 doesn't exactly offer as much gore. We do get to see some unique battles take place, considering that we're in the middle of medieval times. You probably would assume that there would be a good amount of gore showing up from when people get stabbed by swords or sliced off. None of that really happens all that much, so when it's Ash's turn to go into the pit, he does so. But then Deadites start popping out. And while he is able to fight some of them in a pretty decent manner, someone is able to get a hold of his chainsaw, and his chainsaw hand comes right back on. There is also the point in which that he's able to climb on out of the pit on his own, despite another demon following him, eventually getting crushed. While Ash pulls himself out of the hole, makes a bit of a shoelaces untied joke to this other man, and then punches him in the face, showing that he truly is stronger. And while this opposing prince, leader of this army in particular that is going up against Henry, challenges Ash, one shot from the boomstick pretty much eliminates his sword. Slices it down into pretty much nothing, just a hilt. Ash just goes on to explain that this boomstick was manufactured in Grand Rapids, Michigan, cobalt blue steel for the most part in the coloring, and a nicely trimmed wood stock. On top of all that, he does try to convince them to create gunpowder and stuff, as he is going to need some for the manufacturing of more shotgun shells for the boomstick. And you could say that this one device that he's holding, hundreds of years from the future, really does earn the respect that he's looking for. I mean, think about it. If I brought a massive Odachi back to ancient Japan, would they start respecting me as some sort of god just for wielding something that's hundreds of years more advanced? I guess there's only one way to find out. Anyways though, Ash is basically treated like a king of his own, earning himself a good meal, some massages, and even some respect from the same lady we saw earlier whom spat at him for what happened to somebody she knew. In any case though, Ash is now looking to find a way home. A Merlin comes around and explains to him that what he's got to do is find the original Necronomicon and say the following phrase: Klaatu Barada Nikto. If the words sound familiar to you, then well, this is the same code that was actually spoken out in The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951 version of course, as this was way before the 2008 remake. But even still though, this slight reference to The Day the Earth Stood Still doesn't play all that much effort into it though, because upon Ash's journey to find the Necronomicon, he spends a bit of time as spirits start wandering around in the woods and the same old stuff that we'd seen earlier, until finally he gets bucked off his own horse and he runs into a windmill, where some time passes eventually where a number of weird shenanigans take place. Mini Ashes start spawning all over the place, and there eventually goes one into his stomach, upon which another head starts growing from his shoulder like a vestigial twin, or I guess like that Family Guy episode where Peter Griffin had a vestigial twin of his own. Though this was also before that episode of Family Guy even existed. Anyways though, this second Ash head eventually splits away from the real Ash's body, turning into a doppelganger. This evil Ash is way more insane compared to the real one, but is still taken out pretty easily by one hit from the boomstick. But, spoiler alert on this one, he doesn't die. Despite being buried and even having a cross built on top of him, he eventually will be brought back to life. But until that happens, Ash Williams goes on to find the Necronomicon, only that there's 3 of them this time. One of which just sucks his jaw in, basically making him look like... I mean, it could be a Dr. Seuss character, I don't know that much I could say about it. But there also is another one that gets a little bitey with him. When he finds the real one though, he does remember the Merlin taught him about a specific set of words. However, he only halved it out, saying Klaatu Barada without the Nikto. But he just pretends that he got it right. Little does he realize though, it will come back to bite him, quite literally. Upon getting back to the castle, and upon the Necronomicon being handed to the Merlin, Ash does confess that he messed up, and that this mistake could very well mean the end of these people that he's come to know. However, the prince is not really willing to give up here. Despite having 2 big leaders and 2 big armies here, it seems that everybody's wanting to help with Ash Williams in this battle against the Army of Darkness. Yeah, I said that because after all, what happens is that Evil Ash rises back up from the dead, dons a really cool skull helmet on top of him, as well as some unique armor. A giant army of stop-motion skeletons show up. A lot of them are done in a more practical way, which really solidifies the unique comedic tone. Some jokes are also made here and there with these Army of Darkness members, which really does solidify this as a more comedy-edged film as opposed to gory and horror-related. In any case though, the Army of Darkness makes their way to the castle, and it eventually gets to the point where things start to look hairy, as the armies both open fire with their bows and arrows and swords all clashing at each other. It's an epic festival of slacking and slashing and all sorts of crazy stuff. Between both armies, it's a bit hard to truly decide who is the winner here, because what eventually happens is that Ash and Ash are all neck and neck, fighting each other's throats until the end truly comes around. Evil Ash is burned to the bone and then catapulted, and then eventually, because some gunpowder was stored in there as well, he explodes as well. The Necronomicon is returned safe, and many of the skeletons end up fleeing upon realizing their leader was destroyed in the explosion. So, the day is won. And between both armies of King David and King Henry, we were able to see the likes of both of our unique heroes come to agreement with each other that this one battle against the army of the dead was something. Ash Williams is eventually given the potion to be able to return back to his own time in the 80s, and this time he manages to recite the words that he was told by the Merlin, Klaatu Barada Nikto. But upon realizing to his home job in S-Mart, he talks to a certain co-worker of his, who was also played by Sam Raimi's relative, if you might remember earlier on. Well, he might have messed up again. And sure enough, that's what happens, because this ending in S-Mart leads to him grabbing one of the boomsticks, fighting a deadite until it dies. Not exactly as climactic as one would seem. I could probably think of another way to really climax this film and make it the best one of the whole trilogy. But nonetheless, it does earn him a similar ending as to what happened back in medieval times. He got some sugar, baby, and he was not afraid to deliver it here. But either way you look at it, Army of Darkness, or Evil Dead 3, which is especially what I'm going to be calling this because that's what it is, the third Evil Dead film. You shan't be afraid of the number 3 in the same regard as to the number 4 being said here. Anyways, though, I give this film a solid 9.0 out of 10.1. Quite an incredible third film in a series. Much like many other number 3s in franchises of all sorts, I really do recommend seeing this one more so than the others. Not only because it's bigger, but also more destructive, in the more literal sense. Of course, this is just Sam Raimi pretty much being at his peak here. Either way you look at it, though, that's it for Evil Dead. Like I said, I'll come back soon when the next Evil Dead film comes out, and that way, I'll have another trilogy to cover. 3 more Evil Dead films, and I'm sure I'll cover Evil Dead, Ash vs. Evil Dead, at some other point in time. But make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.